Well, something strange happened, and I felt like I couldn't tell anybody. Either no one would listen, or they acted like I was psychologically off kilter. I couldn't figure out what to do. I had a near-death experience, or NDE, and that led to other experiences with different types of paranormal activity. Yet now I'm learning that many other people who had an NDE had similar things happen to them as well. I've seen some of them say that they interacted with ghosts, and they also interacted with UFOs and extraterrestrial beings. I heard that people who had a NDE had similar experiences as me. Yet learning that information didn't help me figure it all out, but it did seem like a missing piece of the puzzle had been found. I still can't quite figure out what happened and why it happened, yet the stories are often very similar with people who had an NDE. Yet many of us still get shunned, or people act like we're mentally off kilter. I've seen full-body apparitions, shadow figures, and I've seen objects seemingly move on their own. I've heard many types of unexplained sounds. I've heard disembodied voices, and I've even heard some call me by name. I've also heard the sounds of doors opening and closing when no one else was home. I've heard footsteps walking in the house when no one else was there. Yet I can say that I've learned a few things that help me learn to live with these things. Well, I still don't know what to do, so here's my story of what happened to me. This is our family's true tales of the supernatural, and this is the Season 3 premiere. Before I get into the story I want to tell you in this episode, let me show you some of the things that happened to me over the last several years. I'll also try to show you some pictures that I made to recreate or reenact what happened and what I saw. A few years ago, I had an NDE, and after that, I started seeing some strange things. Like I said, I've seen full-body apparitions and shadow figures. I've also heard many different types of unexplained sounds and disembodied voices. Here's a few pictures I made to illustrate some of the things I've seen through the last few years. A few years ago, I had a kidney stone, and as I was recovering in bed, I kept seeing an apparition peek into my bedroom. He looked like he had blood streaming down over his face. I kept seeing that apparition for months. I later learned that a former resident of my house was killed in a motorcycle accident. I think it was him. About 2 or 3 years later, I saw an apparition in our hallway as I was going to the bathroom. A storm had knocked out our power, and as I was about to step into the bathroom, I noticed the figure standing at the other end of the hallway. The next year, things started to go wild in my house. One night, as I was all alone in the house, I heard footsteps, voices, and doors opening and closing. I also started seeing shadow figures on a steady basis after that. A short time later, as I was going to bed one night, I saw what appeared to be a skinny, grim reaper in my bedroom. That one made me jump out of bed, turn on the lights, and look around to see what it was. but it had disappeared when I turned the light on. The next year after that, it got even more wild, and there was more paranormal activity. As I got up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, I saw a full-body apparition in the bathroom. Then, over the next few weeks and months, I saw more shadow figures and more full-body apparitions. That isn't the whole story. Yet before I get to the rest of the story, let me recap how it all started. That way, I can give you more insight into my story. Hello, and welcome to the Season 3 premiere of Our Family's True Tales of the Supernatural. This is the show where I talk about things that are supernatural and paranormal activity that I've witnessed. For this season of the show, I'm going to be delving into some different forms of extraordinary occurrences. The last 2 seasons, I talked about the different types of paranormal activity I have witnessed. So at this time, let me tell you about something that I believe led to these different types of things. I feel like I need to tell you that as I look back at my near-death experience, I felt the need to look into it more. I've found that many other people who had an NDE went on to have other paranormal experiences. Many of them also had experiences with some other things that I'll be commenting about throughout this season of the show. First of all, I've found out that experts who study NDEs, or near-death experiences, now say that they noticed that NDEs fall into 3 categories. So there are 3 different types of near-death experiences. Let me tell you what they are. 1. Typical NDEs are where a person is classified as dead, like dying during surgery. The heart monitor registers no heartbeat. Some cases also have an EEG or electroencephalogram that shows no brain activity. So these people are completely dead and they have a vision of the afterlife, visiting heaven, or seeing heaven. 2. The second type of NDE is where a person has a dream or gets knocked out and they see or visit the afterlife or heaven. I had a situation like this myself. You might have heard me talk about it in season 1 of the show. I think I was sleeping and had a dream, or else I died in my sleep and then later woke up. I think at the time I had extremely high cholesterol that was about double what it should have been. So I don't know if it was a dream or if I died. I have no evidence to definitively say I died, so I cannot definitively claim that. However, there's also a third type of near-death experience. So that's number 3. The third type of near-death experience is called either a group death experience or a shared death experience. This has been documented in a few different cases as well. These cases are where a group of family and friends gather around a loved one who is dying. The group of people might then see 1 or 2 glowing people or glowing pillars of steam enter the room. The glowing people go up to the dying person and stand at their side. The spirit of the dying person then sits up and seems to step out of their body. Their spirit then walks off with the other spirit or spirits that entered the room. As they walk off together, they seem to fade away from everyone's sight. There are several well-documented cases that are similar to these group death experiences. I've also recently found a conservative theologian who accepts NDEs as true, accurate, authentic, and acceptable. I've also looked into NDEs a bit and found that many people who have NDEs experienced other types of paranormal activity. I'll be talking about this in this season of the show. I've seen interviews with people who had NDEs, and they said that they have seen ghosts and interacted with them. They even mentioned that they had other types of encounters that I'll be talking about later in the show. The things I'm about to tell you is based on my testimony and that of other people who had NDEs. When I had an NDE dream, I visited heaven and saw other people in a vast white room that reached as far as the eye could see. I also saw another bright glowing light in the distance that seemed like God. I was told it wasn't my time to be there and that I had to go back to live my life. Let me show you a video clip from Season 1, Episode 11 that illustrates what I saw in my NDE. I stood up and I could see what seemed like an enormous white room that stretched as far as the eye could see. Even the white floor seemed to extend as far as the eye could see. I couldn't see any walls in any direction. It seemed like there was a white ceiling, but I couldn't tell how high it was. All I could see was white in the background, so I couldn't even tell how high the ceiling was. I noticed that there were several groups of people all around me. The groups were different sizes. Some were groups of 2 or 3. Some groups had maybe a dozen or a few dozen. These groups of people looked like they had been having conversations with each other, yet now they had looks of concern as if they were wondering if I was okay or not. I looked to my right to see that guy who had helped me put on my robe, and he was glowing a golden color. I wondered if he was an angel, but I didn't ask. I looked off into the distance, which seemed like 200 or 300 feet away, which would be about 70 to 100 meters. I saw something that seemed like a large, bright light. It was the only bright, shining object that was still too bright for me to clearly see. My robe couldn't filter that light all that much, but it didn't hurt to look into that light. I then considered that I might be in heaven or that I was seeing a vision of heaven. I also considered that the bright light in the distance might be God. I thought to myself that I should try to be on my best behavior, be nice, and say hello to God, if it was God. I then smiled, waved my hand, and said hello to God. I then heard a mellow yet loud booming voice echo back saying, "Hello, my son, I love you." I stood in awe, and I was speechless when I heard him respond to me that way. The glowing person next to me then told me, "You're loved, accepted, and welcome in this place." I was also told that I was always welcome there, and that they would welcome me back in the future. Well, I had a Type 2 NDE in autumn of 2004, and a few interesting dreams after that. Yet a short time later, I started to have other dreams that seemed a bit more odd, where I started visiting other planets. Most of those planets merely had strange animal life. I thought they were only odd dreams, but I didn't take them too serious at first. I also wondered if I had those dreams due to stress or because I ate too much food late at night. Yet I kept having strange dreams of visiting other planets. Even if I didn't have any stress or eat late at night, I still had those dreams. The story I'm conveying here originated with this dream where I visited heaven, and a few other strange dreams after that. Whether these dreams actually happened or not is up to you to decide. Whether these dreams were a vision, a visit to heaven, or were some other type of interaction, I still don't know. There was one event that helped me start down the road to my own inner peace, which was that I learned to love people. It took me a while to go through this first step. Once I learned to love people, Something seemed to ignite a spark in my life. That spark seemed to jumpstart my life and renewed my passion for life. Once that happened, I learned other life lessons that led to even greater inner peace. When I first learned to love people, I felt euphoric, and most of my angst and judging of other people dwindled away. I felt enlightened and like I didn't have a care in the world. As I lived those first few days in euphoria, many of my friends said I changed so much that it seemed like I was a different person. They told me that I was much more kind and loving toward people after that. As I first gained this love for people and learned some lessons in life, the first few dreams occurred. I had a dream that was like a near-death experience. I later learned that most people that had an NDE learned that God loved all people during their NDE or shortly before or after their NDE. I had learned this a few months before my dream that was like an NDE. All that happened in 2004. Once I had my dream where I visited heaven, it seemed to open a door that led to other dreams and experiences. At first, I seemed to start experiencing paranormal activity, such as seeing ghostly activity. I've had several experiences where I've seen full-body apparitions, shadow figures, and heard many unexplained sounds. Yet shortly after I started seeing those things, I also started having dreams of other interesting things. I started having other interesting dreams such as walking on the beach with Jesus Christ and talking to him. As we walked along the beach, I was telling him all the stuff I learned about God loving all people. Those dreams seemed to lead me to have other types of odd dreams. I started to have dreams that seemed like the science fiction movies, like the one that led into my NDE dream. I even had dreams where I saw the same spaceship that I had traveled in at the beginning of my NDE dream. I then had some dreams where it seemed like I was visiting other planets around the galaxy. The first dream where I seemed to visit another world, I didn't see anything that seemed out of the ordinary at first. I walked around and only saw what looked like jungle forestry with lots of trees and with plenty of small bushes and undergrowth. I walked through the jungle for a while and thought I heard animals walking around in the distance. I tried to figure out where the sound was coming from so I could go see the animals on this strange planet. I walked through the jungle and forestry and got to a point where there was a clearing with no trees. I slowly made my way over to the edge of the clearing so I could see what type of animals were there. At first, I couldn't see any animals, and I wondered if they were so small that they hid in the bushes around the clearing. I looked around and didn't see anything at first. Then I noticed something moving in the distance. It seemed to be about 200 feet away, or 60 or 70 meters. I tried to focus my eyes to get a good look at the creature. As I focused my eyes on the creature, I noticed that it was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. The creature looked like a type of dinosaur that was a cross between a large lizard, a horse, and a bull. It seemed to jump around back and forth like it was in a rodeo, yet it had smooth skin like a lizard or dinosaur. It looked similar to the size of a horse or a bull. It kept jumping around, kicking its legs up, and bucking back and forth like a wild colt. It looked a bit like a bull that was being attacked by hornets. It kept jumping around and bucking its legs back and forth, enjoying itself like a young wild colt. It kept running back and forth, and it would stop to kick its legs up and buck with its legs kicking back and forth a few different times. The creature kept running around in such a wild and unpredictable manner that I hid behind the bushes to stay safe. I stood there watching this dino horse run back and forth for what seemed like a few minutes, and then I woke up. I then went about my regular daily activities for a few days, but a few weeks later, I had another dream where I saw myself on another alien world. I found myself walking on the planet's surface, and I remembered different types of topography. I saw forestry, fields of grass, a river, and a barren desert full of sand, rocks, and hills. I walked toward the calm river, yet the closer I got, the more grass, bushes, and trees I saw. As I approached the river, it looked like the water was dark and the surface was smooth. It looked like it was about 40 to 50 feet across, or 15 to 17 meters. I noticed that on the other side of the river, there were some trees. Yet beyond the few trees that I saw, about 300 feet away, or 100 meters, was what looked like an open, grassy field. I wanted to cross the river and explore the other side with the open, grassy field and the surrounding area. I stepped into the river, and the water flowed smoothly, and it didn't have much of a current. Since it flowed so smoothly, it had stayed smooth on the surface even when I went through the water. Even when I started to walk into the water, it didn't seem to disturb it or cause too many ripples. I moved slowly as I inched my way across. I moved so slowly that I didn't disturb the water all that much. There was only a very small ripple that didn't seem to travel much more than 3 feet or 1 meter. As I walked halfway across the river, the water was up to my stomach. I kept up my slow pace to make my way across the river. As I got most of the way across, I felt a sharp prick on my right hip. I gave a slight yelp as I felt the prick. I looked down in the water and saw 2 different creatures a few inches below the surface. One of the creatures I saw looked like a giant sea urchin drifting by. It was much bigger than the width of my hand, like most sea urchins would be. It was about 1.5 feet or 1/2 meter wide. Yet next to it was a fish about 2 feet long, or about 0.6 meters, that had several long fang-like teeth. The fangs looked like they were the length of my fingers. I got concerned and didn't want any further bites or stings, so I kept moving to the shore on the other side so I could get away from those creatures. I walked among the trees and continued to walk to the open field of grass. As I got to the field of grass, I looked back and forth and took a long gaze around the area. I could also see some hills and mountains off in the distance as well. I then saw a flash of bright white light, and I got jolted awake. I was once again left with the feeling that something significant had happened, but I couldn't tell what it was. It seemed like I could see a pattern emerging. I could see that the pattern was consistent almost every time. For one thing, I noticed that I kept getting awakened by flashes of light. Yet I thought it was interesting that I seemed to visit another planet, but something else seemed strange. It seemed as if the time I spent in the dream was like I was watching a TV show or a movie. Since it was only a dream, it seemed like I had a big letdown when I would wake up. All the excitement melted away in an instant, and I had to return to a dull life where I had to go back to a boring job. Yet it was odd that I kept dreaming about alien worlds. I kept trying to remember these dreams. Sometimes I kept written records of them since they seemed so vivid. I couldn't quite figure out why I kept dreaming about alien worlds. I began to ponder what I had seen as I had more of these dreams. I wondered if there was a bigger story. I thought that there might be another big spaceship that is a sister ship to the one I flew in. It would be like the one that I saw in my first dream about flying across the galaxy. I also wondered about what kind of captain it would have. I then surmised that it could be like me, except it would be an antagonist. It would be a comparison between the old version of me before I gained a greater sense of inner peace and love for other people. I wondered what type of person would be like that as the captain of a spaceship. What if that captain went back to check the space probes I left as I flew across the galaxy? But yet maybe he was a bit deranged in his thoughts. What if that captain had a lot of inner turmoil and went rogue or held a grudge against other people? What if he was a very judgmental person who wanted to punish people he deemed to be too sinful? What if his angst ate him up inside and he became a twisted man who wanted to destroy the people he hated? These were just thoughts that I was having in my mind, and I was contemplating writing a fictitious book about the dreams that I had. Yet, a few weeks after wondering about another captain of another spaceship, I had a dream where I lived out that very same storyline. It was the exact same story, except the captain and his ship disappeared and didn't return from their first mission. In the dream, people got concerned that he didn't return and wondered if his harsh attitude led him to refuse to return. They thought the other captain might be a very judgmental person, so they thought he might not want to return to Earth. They even wondered if he might even harbor destructive desires and use his ship and its weapons against people on Earth. So they thought I might understand him since I believed in God as well. I tried to tell them that I wasn't judgmental like he was, yet they thought I might be able to reason with him and get him to return peacefully, or at least find him and his crew anyways. So I was sent to try to find him and his spaceship. As I traveled on his prearranged course to check the space probes I left to map the galaxy, I retraced his course. I started checking all the space probes that the other captain should have checked. Those were the probes that helped me map out the galaxy. I eventually found one probe that showed where the sister ship had gone off course and flown away in another direction. We traced their course and found the ship out in deep space. We boarded it to investigate, since our efforts to communicate were fruitless. I had a small group of people that went with me. We took a small shuttle pod to their ship, and then walked through the hallways with dim lighting. We then got to the main power reactor control room. As we got there, the door opened automatically. I saw a vertical shaft in the middle of the large room that was glowing a green color. I saw the glowing shaft encircled by computer consoles. It looked like the crew left the power on a low setting and then abandoned the ship. I thought I heard some noises, and I started looking around the reactor control room. I didn't see anyone there, so I looked around the halls around the spaceship. I saw a screen on the wall flashing and glitching. A flash of light then seemed to blind me and knock me out, but I then woke up in real life. As I awoke, I remembered being on the spaceship in the reactor control room. I also remembered seeing the glowing green reactor shaft. I then remembered the rest of the dream and how it correlated with the things I had recently been thinking about. More and more, this seemed to be creating a long storyline where I kept dreaming about science fiction themes. It was all coming from dreams, and my dreams kept focusing on spaceships and alien worlds. I thought it might make for a nice story, but I couldn't figure out why I kept dreaming about these same themes. I thought it was interesting, but I didn't think it was a big deal or a life-altering event. Yet somewhere in the back of my mind, it did seem like it was starting to point in that direction. Yet it baffled me, and I couldn't figure out why I kept getting pointed toward these science fiction themes. I also couldn't figure out how it kept happening over and over again. I tried not to let it capture my thinking too much, but instead I tried to go back to my job so I could earn a living. My job was going downhill at this time, and the situation was causing me to become more stressed. Management and some other people were starting to become unbearable. It was becoming overwhelming. My direct supervisor was an easygoing guy, yet the rest of the job was getting on my nerves a bit too much, and the drama and bad attitudes from other people was getting excessive. All the circumstances with my job made me wonder if the stress made me have strange dreams, or if it was something else. I would soon learn of some other things that might have been causing these issues as well. What was especially interesting was that the next sci-fi dream seemed to pick up where the previous dreams left off. I ended up looking for the crew of the empty ship that I had found. It also made it seem like these were much more than merely simple dreams. I had dreams where I saw a couple of different planets. As I was in another dream, I had the notion that our ship's sensors had shown evidence of another ship that flew away from the ship I found. That other ship flew away from the abandoned sister ship. The sensors showed that the other spacecraft traveled through space to another solar system. So we flew our ship to that solar system and detected that the other ship had flown to a planet in that system. As we got to the planet, I flew a small shuttle pod to the surface and walked around a bit. I was walking around on the planet's surface and noticed that the area looked like it was a desert wasteland with a few hills and flattened valleys that were mostly sand and gravel. There were also a few sparse trees and some small bushes here and there. As I moved into the desert area, I saw a few cylinders that were on the surface that had some type of gun turrets at the top of them. I started to walk over to these cylinders to see if I could investigate. I wondered if the rogue captain and his crew built these, and if they did, how did they build them so fast? They had disappeared only a short time before this happened, maybe a few days. I also wondered if aliens had built these structures. I then wondered why I didn't see any of the rogue captain's crew or aliens walking around the area. I walked up to one of the turret towers and saw an opening at the side so a person could get into the tower. The walls of the tower seemed thick and solid and seemed like they could likely withstand a blast. I then heard a strange noise coming from up in the sky, and I looked up to see a small spaceship. It was like a shuttle pod that was bigger than the one I flew in. I stood there as the fast-moving spaceship swooped down as if it were going to swoop down lower over me. I thought it might land and I could talk to the rogue captain, his crew, or some aliens. So I stood there waiting for them to come down low and land. Yet as they came down low to the surface of the ground, they didn't slow down at all. The spacecraft flew in fast and started firing golden energy beams, hitting the ground near the area where I was standing. I flinched and was quick to hide inside the turret tower. I turned to look at the spaceship as it streaked past me and flew by. It seemed like they flew upward and turned to make another strafing run at me. I grabbed the guns on the turret tower to fire back if I needed to. As I stood at the top of the tower and poked my head out of it, I saw the spaceship turning back toward me. I took another look at the guns in the turret tower, grabbed the handles, and tried to figure out how to shoot the guns. I then heard some small explosions on the ground where the spaceship was firing its energy beams at me again. I tried to make sure I pushed the right buttons to fire the guns on the turret. I couldn't get the guns to work at first, but my hands moved like lightning to turn off the safety switch so I could fire back. I looked up and saw the flying craft continuing to fire at me, so I started to return fire. I saw golden energy beams flying out of the twin guns on the spaceship. Neither one of us got a good hit on the other. Yet as the spacecraft flew past me, I turned the turret around and kept firing at it. I saw the silvery ship flying up in the air again and curving around to make another swooping run at me. This time I ducked my head down and tried to take careful aim at the ship as it came toward me. As the flying spacecraft came lower to the ground, we both started trying to fire our weapons at each other. As it came closer, I was sure that I was getting a few good hits on the attacking vessel. I thought I heard a couple of popping noises and the vessel stopped firing. Yet the vessel was still coming toward me and getting very close to the ground. I then suspected that the pilot of the vessel was going to try to ram their ship into the tower I was standing in. So I sprang into action and climbed to the top rim of the tower. As the spacecraft was about to hit the tower, I jumped away with all my strength. I was hoping to get as far away from the impact and explosion as possible. Yet as it hit, the explosion pushed me through the air much further than I had intended to jump. As the explosion pushed me through the air, I could feel the strong wind and heat from the blast. It felt like it almost gave me whiplash. I tried to adjust my arms and legs so I wouldn't hit the ground at an odd angle or break my neck. Yet I couldn't control how I fell through the air or the way I was about to land on the ground. All I remember is that it seemed like I was about to do a belly flop and land face first in the sand. The next thing I knew, I was opening my eyes as I lay there on the ground looking up at the sky. It seemed very difficult to stay conscious as my crewmen walked up to me and were picking me up to carry me back to our shuttle pod. They were telling me that I would be okay and that they were taking me away to get me some medical attention. I had a strong suspicion that the spacecraft firing at me was the rogue captain or his crew. I lacked definitive evidence because the spacecraft got obliterated upon impact. There were no biological remains found either. The explosion completely obliterated any and all evidence. As my crewmen carried me away on a stretcher, everything faded to black. But I then saw a quick flash of white light. I then woke up in my bed in my bedroom. As I went about my daily routine over the next few days, I wondered why I kept having these dreams. The dreams were like science fiction movies, but I kept having science fiction themed dreams over and over again. I wondered why I kept dreaming of other worlds, and I wondered what happened to that rogue captain. I started to wonder if I would ever track down that rogue captain in my dreams. It was almost like I was living out a science fiction television series or a series of movies. I still thought these dreams were entertaining, and I hoped I wasn't having dreams due to excessive stress. I was also hoping that the stress hadn't made me mentally unstable. As I thought more about the dreams I was having, I thought that it seemed like this was an unfolding saga. It really did seem more and more like it was a television series or a series of movies. It seemed like I kept having dreams about space exploration and possible interaction with extraterrestrials. I could hardly wait to see what happened in the next dream. I had no idea what I would see or what would happen next. Whatever caused the dreams, it sure did seem to be turning into quite a story. Although at this point, I still didn't know what to make of it all. As I went about my daily routine over the next few days, I wondered why I kept having these dreams. The dreams were like science fiction movies, but I kept having science fiction themed dreams over and over again. I wondered why I kept dreaming of other worlds, and I wondered what happened to that rogue captain. I started to wonder if I would ever track down that rogue captain in my dreams. It was almost like I was living out a science fiction television series or a series of movies. I still thought these dreams were entertaining, and I hoped I wasn't having dreams due to excessive stress. I was also hoping that the stress hadn't made me mentally unstable. As I thought more about the dreams I was having, I thought that it seemed like this was an unfolding saga. It really did seem more and more like it was a television series or a series of movies. It seemed like I kept having dreams about space exploration and possible interaction with extraterrestrials. I could hardly wait to see what happened in the next dream. I had no idea what I would see or what would happen next. Whatever caused the dreams, it sure did seem to be turning into quite a story. Although at this point, I still didn't know what to make of it all. A few weeks went by, and I wondered what I would see in the next dream. I figured that there would likely be another dream because I was still working in a stressful job. The situation at the job was still continuing to go downhill and was getting more stressful as the weeks went by. Through the next few weeks, I would catch myself daydreaming and wondering what my next dream might reveal. I wondered if it might reveal more about the missing rogue captain and his crew. I had found the missing spaceship and all the crew seemed to have abandoned it. I also wondered if I would travel to another alien world in the next dream. Then, one night I had another similar type of science fiction dream, and I visited another planet. My ship's sensors showed that a spaceship had left the last world I visited, and the trail led to this world. As we got to the planet, and were in orbit over the planet, our sensors detected a building structure on the surface of the planet. I wanted to go investigate, so I flew in my shuttle pod with some other crewmen and went to the planet's surface. As I traveled to the planet's surface, I saw desert wastelands and barren, brown mountains. I then saw an area that looked like a flat plain, and I saw a structure that looked like a building with an aircraft runway. The runway looked like it led straight up to the building. The building looked like it was about 3 to 5 stories tall. Each wall looked like it could have been at least 200 to 300 feet long, or 66 to 100 meters. It seemed like it was a combination of a large aircraft hangar and an airport terminal. I didn't know how the rogue captain and his crew could have built it in the period of time since they had disappeared. I wondered if he had a lot more help than I suspected, or if there was an extraterrestrial influence. As we came in for a landing, I flew our shuttle pod on a slow approach to the front of the building. I made a soft, slow landing about 50 feet or 16 meters from the front of the building. The front of the building had what looked like a large hangar door that was left open. As I got out of my shuttle pod, I was slow and cautious as I walked toward the large open doorway. I walked into the open doorway and was hoping I could talk to the missing captain. I hoped we could talk in a peaceful manner to work some things out. I kept 2 crewmen with me, and another 2 with the shuttle pod. I went into what looked like a large hangar bay, and I moved very carefully as I walked across the room. I made sure the 2 crewmen I had with me stayed close and carefully looked around as we walked further. I noticed on the back wall of the hangar bay was a door to enter the other part of the building. I made my way over to the door, and it opened on its own right in front of me. I jumped to the side in case anyone might come to attack us. My crewmen also jumped to the side with me. We slowly peeked around the corner, but didn't see anyone. As I looked into the doorway, I saw that there was a hallway that went to the right, but there was a wall to the left. So I slowly stepped through the doorway and tried to look around before I proceeded forward. As I looked further down the hallway, it looked like it was at least 50 to 70 feet long, or about 16 to 23 meters. The hallway then took a 90-degree turn to the left. So we slowly crept our way down the hallway to the corner that turned to the left. We stopped there and took a slow peek around the corner. I saw that the hallway looked like it went another 50 to 70 feet and then turned to the right again. As I walked down that section of the hallway, I noticed that near the corner on the left was a large mirror. The mirror looked like it was about 6 feet wide, or 2 meters, and 6 feet tall as well. The bottom of the mirror was at the level of my waistline. As I got to the next corner of the hallway, I peeked around the corner again. I saw that the hallway went another 50 to 70 feet to the right, or straight down as I looked down the hallway. I then heard what seemed like an intercom that turned on with a quick burst of static and scratching sound. I spoke up and mentioned that I was here to meet someone to talk to, and I needed to know where to go to meet them. A voice came on the intercom and told me to go the rest of the way down the hallway to the door at the end of the hallway. I turned and continued to walk the rest of the way down to the end of the hallway, where I came to another door. As I approached the door, it opened by itself. I flinched back a bit, since I still didn't know if I would get attacked by the rogue captain and his crewmen. Yet I slowly leaned forward to look into the large room, and I saw large crates stacked in different places in the room. It looked like there was a wide walkway through the center of the room. The walkway led through the middle of the room and crisscrossed both ways. Each walkway led to the midway point on the opposite wall with sets of automatic sliding doors. I walked to the middle of the room and stepped to the side a bit in case any attackers came into the room. I also wanted to be in a good position to take cover and defend myself. The stacks of crate divided the room into 4 quadrants with aisles that went around them. So I wanted to be able to step into an empty aisle in case we got attacked. We stood in the middle of the large room where the aisles intersected. We looked in each direction and saw sliding metal doors in all 4 directions. I looked back and forth to try to figure out where we should go. I also wondered if we should wait there to see if anyone wanted to approach us and talk peacefully. I saw a door open to the right, and a short, stocky person in a type of strange-looking clothing walked through the doorway. It looked like the shirt was far too large and was almost like a robe that got tucked into the person's pants. Yet the pants were almost like a robe that had been altered to be in the shape of loose-fitting pants. The person was also wearing a long, raggedy, thin mesh coat over the loose shirt. The person seemed to walk as if they were in slow motion and almost seemed to waddle as they walked. The person moved slow as they made their way across the room, and they passed us without noticing us. They continued to walk straight across the room. They left through the door on the opposite side of the room. Once they walked out and kept walking, the door closed with a swoosh sound. I then saw another group that looked like humans, but were more like a cross between lizards with leopard spots. There were a small number of them, and they walked past me, went through another doorway, and left the room. I wondered if this was a trick from the rogue captain and his crew. I wondered if they got dressed up in costumes, or if I saw real extraterrestrials. I hoped that I could talk to someone without anyone showing any violence toward me or my crewmen. I then heard the other door at the far end of the room open again, and I saw beings that clearly weren't humans. These creatures were 8 to 10 feet tall, or 2.5 to 3.3 meters. Yet their bodies, legs, and arms were very slim, like those of little children. They had skin that was a mixture of pale blue and gray. They also had very large blue eyes. They were like the creatures many people call the Greys. Yet I thought the Greys were small with black eyes. Yet these extraterrestrials were similar, but were very tall. The 3 extraterrestrials walked toward me in a lethargic manner. As they approached me, I was a bit nervous. I hoped they wouldn't hurt me. I also hoped that if they tried to talk to me, they had some type of universal translator. As these tall gray creatures approached, I spoke up and asked them if they were the ones I should talk to. They told me that, yes, they wanted to talk to me about some things. They mentioned that they could tell that I had more inner peace than most humans. They seemed interested in how I had so much more inner peace than the average human. At first, I was a bit confused that this was all they wanted to talk about. I then remembered that it had to do with the time I learned how to love other people right before I had a near-death experience. I also remembered the books that helped me learn about God's love and how to love other people. I started to have a casual conversation with these beings. I told them about the books I read and how they changed my perspective. I also told them about how I had dedicated my life to that type of love and how it changed my life. I also told them how other people noticed the change in my conduct and demeanor. I also mentioned that my friends told me that it seemed like I was a completely different person after that. The extraterrestrials looked at each other with a perplexed look, but also seemed very interested. They seemed to be curious about the things I mentioned. We talked about it a little bit more, and then they talked about it making a deal with me. I didn't quite understand what they were talking about at first. I didn't understand what type of deal they were talking about. I didn't understand why the conversation had changed from talking about inner peace to talking about making a deal. They explained that if I shared what brought me inner peace, they would help me travel to other planets. I told them that I could give them the books and audiobooks that helped me. I could give it to them on CDs, or I could send it in a transmitted message from my spaceship. The 3 extraterrestrials looked at each other and seemed to agree that this would be a good deal. They told me that if I sent them those materials, they would give me something to help me travel to other planets. They might even help me travel to many other planets around the universe. I thought this would be great, and I could explore many worlds to help humans explore the universe. So I told them that I agreed, and they also told me they agreed too. The tall extraterrestrials all looked at each other, and one of them pulled out a device with their hand. That extraterrestrial then held out their hand to give me the object that looked like a chubby television remote control. The device was a mixture of a light tan color and a light gray tone. It had only one big blue button on it in the middle. The button was about 1.5 inch square or 3.8 centimeters. I held out my hand and accepted the device he was giving me. They told me that all I needed to do was push the button to travel to another world. They would also track me as I traveled to help me return in case of an emergency. They told me that they wanted me to look at some other worlds so they would learn about those worlds as well. I was then told that when I sent them my books, they would send a signal to turn on the device so I could use it. I then told them that I would go back to my ship immediately and send them the message with my ebooks and audiobooks. The extraterrestrials, as well as my crew, and I as well, turned and walked out of the room so we could return to our ships. As I returned to my ship, I went to the command and control center and sent copies of my books to the extraterrestrials. They seemed to accept it, and I hoped that I would soon be able to start traveling to other worlds. As I sat in the command and control room at a computer station, I felt like I was going to faint. Yet instead of everything going black, I saw a very bright white light that blurred my eyesight. I then blinked my eyes, and I woke up from the dream. As I thought about the dream, I could see that the world where I met the extraterrestrials was like a crossroads. It seemed to have many extraterrestrials using it as a transport hub and a place to interact, as if it were a crossroads. It was also somewhat like an intersection of worlds. I would later see how this was much more true than I could have imagined. I started to think about what happened in the dream and wondered what was causing me to have these dreams. I started to wonder if these were more than dreams and were real extraterrestrials visiting me or communicating with me. Since I had received the remote control device in this dream, I wondered if I would dream of more alien worlds. I wondered when I would get the opportunity to have another one of these types of dreams. Yet I didn't need to wait long, because the next week I had another strange dream. I'll tell you about the next few dreams I had in the next episode of the show. As for now, please click the thumbs up like button, click subscribe or follow on Rumble so you can catch all the new episodes that come out. You might also click the bell and click all so you get notified of every new episode of the show on YouTube. Please make comments about how you like the show. That helps the algorithm so other people can find the show as well. So, as for now, I'll just say, I hope to see you in the next episode of the show. Goodbye for now.